I'm your host, Bobby Hacker, and today I'm happy to introduce our guest, Eric Andelman, sports and entertainment and project development attorney at Hogan Levels in beautiful and probably cold Denver, Colorado.
Indeed, it is. Thank you, Bobby. Thanks for having
Well,
me.
welcome. I would trade the cold for the smoke and soot in the air here in Los Angeles, but unfortunately, it's what I'm living with today.
Fair enough.
But let me just start out by saying to all of those that are affected here in Southern California, uh, by more than just bad air and whatnot. My heart goes out to you. And if there's anything I can do for any of you, don't hesitate to reach out. This is a real tragedy here in Southern California. But let's move on with my little sad announcement there. Eric, why don't you start off and talk to us about what your current job is and then get a little bit into the path that you took to get there.
Absolutely. So my practice focuses on kind of two different realms of sports and entertainment work. The first realm, which is kind of my primary realm, is a project development for sports and entertainment stadiums and the ancillary development that goes around it. I've done that for the last decade or so and worked on everything as small as kind of parts of AHL arenas through as big as Allegiant Stadium, and all the way from throughout North America and abroad. The other part of my practice is an M&A transactional practice where I'm generally on the buy side representing new buyers of sports franchises or sports teams, both domestically and internationally, for various types of sports, throughout the world. So that's kind of what I do and what I've done. I got into this business. Uh, it's been a while, about 12, 13 years ago. I represented the then St. Louis Rams in a dispute that they had with their stadium authority, um, which was a quasi public entity, quasi governmental entity located in St. Louis, Missouri. The Rams were able to successfully get out of their lease because of the fact that their stadium was not considered first tier or top tier. We represented them and we won in arbitration. And through that experience, we built a good relationship with the Rams, and that created the pathway for the Rams to ultimately move to Los Angeles. But it also created a pathway for me to get involved in all these different types of businesses and sports endeavors. I ended up then joining up with a group that was then called Icon Venue Group, which is now part of Creative Artists Agency called CAA Icon, where I was their division's general counsel. And in that capacity, I worked on, two or three dozen different venues in North America and internationally, where I did all kind of the legal work around the venue development, the framework of the construction and architecture, some of the operational agreements and the sponsorship agreements, and had a blast doing it. Sometime during the pandemic, I made the determination that I wanted to go back into private practice and kind of expand the offering that I could do, that I could offer for clients. And I found myself now at Hogan Levels. I was previously at a different firm. I'm now at Hogan Levels here in Denver, and we have a fantastic sports and entertainment practice, particularly on the sports side, where we've represented some of the major transactions, and I've been part of all of those. And so things are great, and happy to chat about anything. But that's kind of how I got here.
Well, it's really interesting, and I want to get into those specifics, but you also said that the second or the other part of your practice is an M&A practice about on the buy side and buying
Yeah,
in. So I got to ask, because the hottest issue is how the NFL has relaxed their rules.
yeah.
Is there a lot of action happening there now?
Absolutely. We've seen a lot of minority investments. So immediately as new sources come into the, the ecosystem, you have a valuation change. And so now we know that NFL properties, which have been valued at tremendous amounts and have gone up tremendously over the last 5, 10 years, you introduce a new accelerant, which is new types of money and money that has a different relationship to the team. There's certain rules that relate to what private equity can do with respect to the teams, their managerial and governance roles. And as a result, we've seen a lot of these owners say, well, look, this valuation has never been better than before, and therefore I want to sell out to minority pieces and other things. I think we'll see more activity on the control side, so a majority stake or a plurality stake, so to speak, of the teams as we go forward. But yeah, it has definitely increased the interest in sports and entertainment assets. It's also had an effect a little bit differently, but kind of it's piqued interest in other areas. You've seen commentary on maybe how NIL collectives might have private equity influence. I've also seen a lot of interest on the European side, and while that doesn't have a direct nexus to the private equity space in the NFL, there clearly has been a demand shift and a demand increase in perhaps alternative types of sports properties that people want. I should say that we do buy and sell side. We typically find ourselves on the buy side, although we certainly represent sellers and we're involved on a couple major transactions on the sell side as well.
So I think this sort of, for me, in any event, begs the following question. If I'm an private equity seeking an interest in, let's say, an NFL team, I'm investing nine figures minimum.
Yeah.
And when I'm throwing that kind of money around and somebody says, well, it's really a passive investment, you have no control, is there a lot of pushback on that? Or is that where the change is going to come so that they can have a more active voice when you're throwing $1 billion at a franchise, for example?
I think it's more about kind of the league and sports operational activities that the leagues are mostly concerned with. When it comes to fundamental corporate activities, of course, there are voting and other things that they're not giving up those rights. I guess we'll see how this evolves over time, but really, what the league wants is someone who is responsive and able to be accountable and be a natural person that can be involved with how these things work. Um, some leagues have gotten more comfortable with private equity taking bigger roles within the governance. Famously, in the NWSL, there have been funds that have control stakes. Overseas, there are funds that have 100% stakes. So we'll have to see how comfortable the leagues get. I mean, in some ways, the NFL was pioneering. In some ways, they were following kind of blueprints from other leagues before it, like the NBA and MLS and others. That said, I think that story is yet to be completed, and so we'll have to see where that ends up.
So when we get down to one of the big issues in those kinds of transactions, and I don't want to belabor this point, but I find it so fascinating, the valuation element. You know, it's you think of a simple transaction. You know, when you're your first year of law school and you're taking contracts, a price that a willing buyer is willing to pay to a
Yeah.
willing seller, blah blah blah. But now you have these investment banks that say, okay, this is now worth X billion. What is the due diligence that goes into evaluating those kinds of numbers?
So, and I can speak about it from kind of when we have a client that we're representing on the buy side. What we would do is we would gather a team of experts, both legal experts, which would primarily be us as outside counsel, as well as kind of subject matter experts. On the valuation side, we would rely very heavily on a financial expert who would run numbers and look very deeply at balance sheets, at debt, at opportunities and constraints within the business, and they'd come up with an analysis of what is kind of the enterprise value and what is the equity value of the business. And in doing so, they're coming up with kind of a sense of, well, the investment banks can say whatever they want in terms of what it's worth, but the rubber really hits the road when you're doing this sort of diligence. We'll also inform that analysis on the legal side by understanding what sort of exposures exist in legal diligence. Is there a major debt that has kind of bespoke terms that create exposures down the road? You see this particularly internationally, where there's things like factoring agreements and debt guarantees and other things that relate to the fundamental business of the enterprise. Are there contracts that are going to create exposures? Is there litigation that we're worried about, and perhaps it's even opportunity if you're um, on a plaintiff side. And so we'll kind of look through all of these things. We'll inform the judgment of our client, and with that data, the client, along with the whole team, will come up with an assessment of, this is what the state of play looks like today. Here's where our risks, here's where our pain points are, and they'll apply a multiple, and the multiple becomes kind of the key. It's kind of set by the market, but it's kind of also set by where the business is going, and it's frequently in a sports deal based on a multiple of revenue. Um, the fact is that that sports properties are so unique because there is kind of a constant inflow of demand on it. We in good times and in bad, while there is sort of an elasticity of pricing, people are still consuming sports. There's only a fixed number of them. In the NFL, the NBA, etc. There's 30 to 32 teams, and while there's always kind of chatter about expansion, historically they've stayed kind of consistent around those numbers, plus or minus a few franchises. So the scarcity and the constant demand makes this a property that is really intriguing to ownership. And while it used to be kind of a vanity thing for individual owners, today it actually becomes something that if you want to go around and sell it later on, it becomes a true valuation asset that you can make money off of. There's kind of a sense that these assets perform better than a lot of other asset classes for those reasons, the scarcity and the consistency of demand. And that's all the things that you take into consideration. And while the valuations have gone up tremendously and people have made a lot of money, there's reasons behind it at the end of the day.
Yeah, my only, and it's almost humorous, and I still joke with the individual about this, but I was on a panel many years ago with a valuation expert, and the Dodgers were for sale, and he was saying, "Oh, I mean, soaking wet, it's a, $900 million deal."
Yep.
And I said, "Look, I'm a TV lawyer, but this thing's going to blow past 1.5 billion and keep
Oh,
going."
yeah.
And they all laughed at me. And then the Dodgers sold for 2 billion.
Yes.
And I sent the guy a note and I said, "Dear Mr. Valuation," and that was it. But it's the process is hard, and I think more now, my sense from watching the market is
Yeah.
just what you're talking about. Is it's less about picking a specific point in time and assessing a value, and it's more about what does the road look like?
Yes.
Where might it go? What's out there? Is there a new TV deal? Is that new TV deal going to generate more guaranteed income, for example?
Yeah.
So if I was, an investor right now and I was looking at getting involved in either the WNBA or the NWSL, the value in the marketplace today seems to me less important than where the calculus of businesses like that are going. And I mean, how do you assess that? Is that a gut? Is that how badly do I as a buyer want to get into this? And how much of a multiplier am I willing to pay over what today's value is?
Yeah. It's exactly what you're saying. You look at where the business is going to go. It's the old like hockey statement. You want to go where the puck is going to be, not where it currently is at. And so a lot of opportunistic buyers are looking at, well, there's a marketplace for these teams. There's only a few of them. A lot of them have maybe been exhausted. Maybe the opportunities I view in XYZ league have all come to fruition. There was a whole discussion about it with Major League Baseball. when they sold off the BAM properties, and that being a huge, this is kind of where we peak. We could debate whether that's true or not. I tend to believe that baseball is still kind of accretive in value and things are great. But if someone's looking at a property like the WNBA, for example, uh, they see the Caitlin Clark effect. They see that the number of young women and young girls that are getting into basketball, or same story for soccer, that creates a great opportunity. And whatever today's enterprise value or the equity value or whether or not they're cash flowing and profitable, that is totally secondary to where they think they might be able to sell it 5, 10 years down the line. That's particularly true when you're talking about private equity, because private equity is looking at a limited horizon for their investment. They're not looking to own this for, like Virginia McCaskey forever. They're looking for a limited horizon where they can have an exit opportunity, be profitable, and disciplined with that investment, which is very different than what potentially a team owner might have looked at 10, 20 years ago, 30 years ago.
Yeah, which is really interesting because I think that's what makes sports franchises so unique
Yeah.
is that you're thinking more about perspective than current.
Yes. In a current business, you're looking at dividends, you're looking at and you are looking at return on investment if it comes down to what is that liquidity event, and that's your typical moment of where you're really going to make money. Some teams are profitable year in and year out, and it gets reinvested in the business. Others aren't, but that doesn't discourage the investment because for some investors, I have friends who work at teams who say, I'm not going to invest in anything that's not cash flow positive. That's a different investment thesis, and that's going to limit the sort of universe of franchises that group might be willing to invest in.
Mm-hmm.
That said, opportunistic investors will kind of put aside the traditional indicia of the business and say, look, I'm interested in what this will yield in 5 or 10 years.
Well, that it's such an interesting world because you look at how the values just keep going up and up and up, and the reported values of some of the bigger franchises, and the billion multiple is gets to be staggering, but people are willing to get in because I think you look at a lot of sports, and from an old media guy like me, the audience for live sports doesn't seem to be going anywhere. So you have
It's
that audience and the experiential going to a game seems to be going strongly across all sports, particularly in women's sports, which is quite fascinating. So I think it's a great place to be. I don't have a crystal ball. They didn't give me one when I got out of law school.
Yeah.
I don't know where it's going to go, but I remember doing TV deals saying, "Oh, they'll never get more than this in the next deal." Then they get double the amount
Yeah.
because you have an audience, you have somebody that wants something, and they're going to keep showing up. So that sort of informs, I think, the decision, even though you're not always dealing with necessarily facts, but rather potential projections based upon the facts you have at hand at the time of entering into a transaction.
No question. And I think the the constants have been, as you said, growing markets, uh, a scarcity of opportunities, barriers of entry. It's not like you can go and create a new. I mean, you could create a new league, and people have tried, but there's such a barrier of entry to get into it. So what we typically find is what can we do within the confines of what we have, and part of that's a digital media, part of that's kind of on the side of that you're used to, but part of that's also relates to the other side of my practice, which is the venue experience. We have found ways to monetize the building and the things that go around the building over the last 10 years in ways that weren't even imaginable. And that's because in the building itself we have things that are activations and engagement with fans. We've always been competing with the people who are on their chair and in their couch at home because that's easy. And now with high definition, and some people might argue that the viewing experience is even more precise and vivid when you're sitting on your couch. So we have to give you something in the venue that brings you there and gives you that excitement, gives you that indelible experience. Um, and we do that through technology, we do that through fan engagement. But what's been most amazing in my mind, and when I started, this was just kind of becoming a thing, is we've engaged you in the district, in the area, for a whole day experience. We have built around, and maybe even longer than that, maybe days that there isn't even a game at the stadium. You want to be in that area to go to a restaurant or work there or live there or play there or whatever it is. And we've created opportunities within a district that just never existed before. That's how we created value.
Which is the perfect segue to talking about the other part of your
Exactly.
practice. So
Exactly.
thank you for leading me there, because that's
Yeah.
where I wanted to get to. Um, I know we talked a lot about during the mid-year symposium that you moderated one panel, which was really terrific and really informative. So thank you again for that. But a lot of that discussion was about smart stadiums, tech, et cetera, that goes into when you're creating a new stadium, a new arena, whatnot. Part of what you were just talking about that I want to get into a little bit is I think sometimes what they refer to as opportunity zones
Yeah.
around new developments. Can you enlighten us and talk to us a little bit about that whole concept of traditionally uh, peoples or municipalities would build stadiums, and there might be a parking lot, and that was it.
Yeah.
That universe doesn't seem to exist anymore. It seems to me now that it's changed the whole scope. I'm not just building a stadium, I'm building a city around the stadium, basically,
Yeah.
an entertainment complex around the stadium. How does all of that fit into the planning of, client A says, hey, we want to build a new stadium in our town. I mean, where does it go from? Do you have to sit them down and say, okay, are you talking stadium or are you talking development?
I would say there's still some clients that say, I know I need a new venue, but I don't know anything about this and I don't have any clue what I want to do. And so for those clients, it is that question of, are you building just a stadium or are we building an entire district? Part of that answer will come down to, how are you financing this? Are you going to finance this through your own equity, which these days is pretty prohibitive? It's so expensive to build these sorts of things. Are you building it just with equity and private debt? Or are you expecting the public sector to chip in whatever it can with respect to these venues? If the answer is the latter, and most clients say, of course, I would love to have some investment from the public sector because these things are many $billion when push comes to shove. Um, that's where the tension has come. And I said, when I've represented clients on the team side, on kind of third party developers, which is kind of a JV or a partnership with an affiliate of the team, as well as the public sector, the municipality or locality or even state governments that get involved. On 30 years ago, let's say, it used to be that the municipalities predominantly owned the buildings. I would say the vast majority of stadiums in the United States were publicly financed and owned by the municipalities or localities or state or whatever it was. And the way that they would finance it is they would take money from general appropriations and they'd write a check. And at those times, even on a real basis, those were much less expensive and less complicated buildings. There was a public purpose that, the local high school could play there, or there could be community benefits in terms of, construction jobs or operational jobs. And that was not, it probably wasn't the top priority of a community, but it was a well-respected priority of a community to build these buildings. Over time, where government budgets have been stretched and people's priorities and political kind of dispositions towards these buildings has changed, such that it is not politically palatable for a government to say, we're just going to write a check, um, particularly at the valuations of what these buildings are. It would be crazy for, um, you know, take the Buffalo Bills, which is going to be a 1.5 to $2 billion stadium, and the government to just write a check for the whole thing. So we've created these things called public-private partnerships, where the government negotiates with the public, and this, a lot of my work relates to this, where the government negotiates with the private party, the team or an affiliate of the team, or plus a developer, and they come up with some sort of plan for financing these buildings. The way that we finance these buildings today is we try to find um, either untapped sources or new sources for the payment of these buildings. That could either be in the form of something like what's called tax incremental financing, like a TIF, where we kind of peg the property values around the arena or stadium, and we look at the incremental and we figure out a way to finance the incremental over a period of years and monetize it into a bond. Or it can be on other sorts of sources like sales tax or district assessments. And that's why the financing and the uses are so tied together. If we're building a district and we can put special assessments or taxes on the transactions in those districts, well, now the government or the governmental agent or the elected representative can say, look, the funding is coming from things that the arena is creating itself. And so it's not going to create an additional burden to a citizen who won't be a user group. The other places that we look for sources, um, as an aside, would be something like hotel taxes or rental car taxes or sin taxes, like cigarette taxes or whatever, where we can use that money monetized to create revenue and ultimately funds and proceeds to build the building. So the sources and the uses are integrally connected, and frequently we can't make the decision without one another. Um, Optimally, we're all building districts these days, if we can. Depends on a lot of factors like the land constraints and other things, but everyone wants one of these today, as you said, and the reason might be because they just want it and it creates money staying in a single district, or because that's the way they finance the kind of crown jewel, which is the arena or stadium.
And once we get to a stadium, and I know we're running long, and it's something that I think people are more interested. Boots on the ground realities
Sure.
are the changing world of getting into these places.
Yep.
Um, Seems to me that the paper ticket is about the way of the dodo bird.
Yep.
It's going away, and it's simple enough if you're a guy putting together a deal to build an arena and the team's going to take care of selling tickets and they're buying tickets. But now you're advising clients on what it means when there's ticketless entry. You have to use your phone, the buying of refreshments based upon facial recognition, et cetera, et cetera. The 1,000 pages of privacy rules
Yeah.
that have to be developed is a game changer. So it's not simply building a stadium, it's building a stadium and developing a very complex privacy policy, correct?
It's a privacy policy, it's a sponsorship deal, it's figuring out how do we monetize of every vendor on the site, including folks you wouldn't even consider, like the tool company that furnishes tools potentially to the construction site. We're trying to figure out every single rock that we can turn over to figure out ways to make more money and monetize. And that's not in a nefarious or selfish way, but that's how these buildings stay on budget and do the things we need them to do. We have a lot of legal issues to consider in that. And it's both contractual from a commercial standpoint, but it's also privacy and other things, as you alluded to. So these are very complex buildings. And as the businesses have become more complex, the buildings they operate in have become more complex. The need for us as legal experts and consultants becomes more paramount.
Well, clearly because we have a couple of new buildings here in Los Angeles.
Yep.
And the newest of them, I don't think I think you probably just walk in and they see you and you go up and you buy food and then you get charged. But when you reach into your piggy bank to pull out of your own pocket and build a stadium like Mr. Ballmer did, I guess you can build the most high tech environment in the world, but not going to be unique for much longer. It seems that's the way everything's going.
Yeah, it's a copycat league, as they say in the NFL. Once at one point, a center hung scoreboard in the NFL was a completely novel idea. Now we're having rings that have major projection and crazy whatever pixels, and that there is an arms race essentially, and it keeps us engaged. It gets us off the couch, and I think it's actually really important because if we learned anything from the pandemic, the togetherness is really an important thing. There is very few things on this earth that bring us so together and are indelible and are so identifying as our connection with our sports teams and our hometown sports teams and the things that identify us as a citizen of those places. And it's been that way for millennia at this point. But particularly, we have created a new American spin on it, and it continually evolves at a rate that probably no one's ever seen. And so I'm really excited to see where we'll go from here. And I think there'll be some amazing things that we can't even imagine right now.
Well, and I couldn't agree with you more. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for lawyers, a lot of opportunity out there for people in related businesses because it's not simply a construction project anymore. It's what
Yes,
it used to be, but that's no longer the case. There are so many touch points, and it's so interesting and so fascinating. And I agree with you. That sense of community is strong, and I think the sort of passionate fan base that we've witnessed in European football for so many years is in some ways becoming part of the American experience. And I notice even here in Los Angeles, the way our two soccer teams, our football teams, fan base is reacting is a lot more like the European model. And that's the engagement and that fan passion, not to sound mercenary, but sells more jerseys.
it does. And it creates a connection that is long lasting, and that's what we're trying to do.
And generational.
And generational. And it becomes part of who you are. If you go overseas, one of the first five things someone might say is, I'm a Liverpool fan or I'm a Dortmund fan, and that's who I am as a person. And I think we as Americans have elements of that, but it's only growing and becoming so much more part of our psyche.
Yeah, and you see it more. I mean, 20 years ago, you looked at any NFL stadium, Major League Baseball stadium, hockey arena, NBA arena, you might see some jerseys. Now, it seems
Coverage.
like everybody has got kit.
Yeah, and it's part of the whole experience to see that sea of whatever your team's color is around that arena, around that stadium, and you feel like you're in some place special, and there's only one of that place at that time to be, and that's pretty amazing experience.
Yeah. Well, look, Eric, thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to speak with us. This was really interesting. I love talking about this kind of stuff because this is about where we're going. And
Yeah,
I think to keep interested as lawyers, uh, if we focus on where we are, gets kind of dull. If we think about where we're going and figuring out what issues might be the ones to spot down the road, that's what makes, practice so dynamic and exciting. So
absolutely.
thank you for sharing that with us. And everyone else out there, it's January. Have you renewed your dues to the SLA yet? If you haven't, go to sportslaw.org and renew. And I hope to see all of you at our annual conference in Nashville. It's going to be great. We're looking back on, I can't even believe this, 50 years of the NFL and what's gone on in that time. So it should be a great event. I hope to see you there, Eric. Thank you again for today, and Happy New Year.